My son told me I wouldn't be welcome at his house for Christmas. I smiled, got in my car, and made a call. By New Year's, I had canceled their mortgage payments. And that was just the beginning of my plan. Justice had to be restored, and arrogance had to be punished. You won't believe what I did next. I sat back in a leather chair in their living room, watching the Christmas lights twinkle on the tree. The house was warm, full of decorations that I had helped pay for, a new rug, the modern furniture, the fancy kitchen appliances. All of it was my doing. Yet, there I was, sitting like a stranger, like a distant relative, not even invited to their Christmas dinner. Emily was standing by the kitchen counter, her back to me, carefully arranging a plate as if she were making sure everything was perfect for the guests. I couldn't help but notice how she always looked so put together, always so pristine. And then there was John, my son, the one I raised, the one I spent years helping, supporting, and sacrificing for. But he couldn't even look me in the eye. His posture had changed when he spoke, like he was bracing for impact. Dad, it's just, Emily's parents are coming, and they don't feel comfortable with you here. They have their own traditions. It's nothing personal. His words came out like he was trying to convince me, but he didn't believe them himself. I felt the cold air rush through me as I heard those words. Not personal? After everything I had done for him? This wasn't just about traditions. This was about control. This was about Emily and her family deciding they didn't want me around because I wasn't good enough for them. I tried to keep my voice calm. So, what do you want me to do? Spend Christmas alone? My hands were cold now, fingers stiff. John's face crumbled, and he looked away. Maybe you could visit Aunt Rosa? Or we could do something after the holidays, like the weekend after. As if Christmas could be rescheduled. As if it was just another appointment that could be moved around. I stood up slowly. Every inch of my body was protesting, but I didn't care. I walked toward the door, past the pictures on the wall. Pictures where my face was growing smaller, more distant in every frame. I reached for the doorknob, cold under my hand. Tell Emily's parents, I said. Merry Christmas, I said quietly without turning around. The door closed behind me with a soft click. Final. I stood there for a moment in the chilly December air, just outside their home, staring at the lights in their windows, knowing I would never be welcome in that house again. I got in my truck, the engine roaring to life, and drove off into the night. My phone buzzed, no doubt a message from John, trying to smooth things over with empty promises and guilt. But I didn't answer. Instead, I drove in silence, the heater humming as I passed the familiar streets, the streets that used to remind me of who I was, someone who believed in family, someone who thought family meant everything. That man, however, was a fool. I didn't expect things to get any better. I spent the next few days in a haze, replaying that conversation over and over in my head. I tried calling John a couple times, but he didn't answer. It wasn't unusual. We hadn't been close in a while. Emily had always managed to put distance between us. Subtly at first, then with more and more conviction as the years went by. But I wasn't blind to it. The phone call I had with Emily a few days later confirmed everything I already knew. Dennis. I know things didn't go well the other day. Her voice was dripping with false sweetness, just like it always was when she needed something. But you have to understand, my parents are very traditional. They've worked hard to get where they are, and they expect a certain level of respect, a certain atmosphere during the holidays. I was quiet, letting her talk. The words were rehearsed, too practiced, but they still stung. Atmosphere? I repeated. You mean my food and my culture don't fit into your perfect little picture of a family Christmas? She hesitated. I could hear the faint sound of her fingernails tapping on the table, as if she were calculating her next move. It's not about your food, Dennis. It's about the way you express yourself, your background, your lifestyle. It's just not the environment they're used to. I felt my blood run cold, but I kept my voice steady. So what you're saying is, my being here would ruin their Christmas? She sighed, pretending to sound apologetic, but I could hear the impatience in her voice. Not ruin, just make it uncomfortable. I gripped the phone harder. It wasn't the first time she made me feel inferior, but it still hurt like hell. I'd given up my retirement savings for them, refinanced my home twice to help with their down payment, paid for their expensive vacations, their furniture, and this was how they repaid me? By making me feel like I didn't belong in my own family. I wasn't going to get angry, though that's exactly what they wanted. So instead, I said calmly, I get it, Emily. I get it. You and your parents don't want me around. But here's the thing. I'm done being the one who's always good enough when you need something and not good enough when you don't. If this is how it's going to be, then so be it. I'll handle it on my own. She didn't know how to respond to that. After a long pause, she muttered, Okay, Dennis, I just thought you'd understand. Then she hung up. I set the phone down carefully on the counter. My hands were shaking now. It wasn't anger, though. It was a realization that everything had been a lie. Everything I'd done for them, every sacrifice, had been for nothing. I wasn't family to them. I was just a tool, a resource they could tap into whenever they needed. I stared at the empty room, my breath heavy. The house I'd helped them build, the things I'd bought for them, felt like they were slowly closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of it all. But there was something else, something that had started to shift inside me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blending into the next. I kept myself busy, throwing myself into work, fixing things around the house, trying to distract myself from the mess I found myself in. But the reality kept creeping back in. My son, my family, had used me for years, and I had let them. It was a call I received a few days after speaking with Emily that made me realize how deep this went. Dad, I need to talk to you. John's voice was strained, as if he was hesitant. We're in a bit of a bind, and we really need your help. I didn't even let him finish. No, there was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him shifting, his voice a little higher now. Dad, please, you don't understand. We're not asking for much. It's just... I said no, John. I cut him off, keeping my voice even. Calm, unemotional. I've helped you enough. His voice faltered. But this is different. You know the new house isn't as stable as we thought. The mortgage, the bills. Emily's parents want to buy a vacation home in the summer, and we need your help. I clenched my jaw. This was exactly what I had been expecting. Another request, another reason to justify using me. The house they bought, the one I helped them secure with a second mortgage. It was never enough. The renovations, the furniture, the vacations, the bills. It was all coming back to me, every single dime. John, I said quietly, do you remember the last time you asked me for help? When you lost your job, when you needed money to cover your rent, and I refinanced my home for you. Or how about when Emily wanted her new kitchen, and I paid for it? You remember all that? I do, but nothing, I said, cutting him off again. I've given you everything. I've paid for that house you live in. I've paid for everything you wanted. And what do I get in return? Your mother would turn in her grave if she knew what I've been doing for you. It's not just money. It's respect. And you've shown me none. He was silent for a moment, and then I heard a sigh. I didn't know it was this bad, Dad. I swear I didn't. I've been trying to get things together. I didn't know how to ask. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street, watching life go on. You don't need to ask anymore, John. It's done. There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was final. John tried to say something else, but I hung up before he could finish. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even disappointed anymore. I was just done. I walked over to the table where all the paperwork was laid out, the mortgage documents, the bills, the bank statements. 5 years of automatic payments I've been making for them. 5 years of my life poured into a home that wasn't even mine. I ran my fingers over the papers, and something clicked inside me. I wasn't going to keep giving. Not another penny. Not another minute. The following days felt strangely quiet, almost like the calm before a storm. I stayed away from the phone, avoiding any calls from John or Emily. I didn't even look at the missed texts or emails. There was nothing left to say. The truth had settled in, and I was done with all of it. I spent my days doing little things around the house. Repairs I'd been putting off for years. I fixed a leaky faucet in the kitchen, touched up the paint on the walls, and even started organizing the garage. It felt like I was finally doing something for myself. I had no intention of turning back now, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling. The realization that this wasn't just about money. This wasn't even about the house or the things I'd given them. It was about respect or the lack of it. I'd spent years believing that family meant sacrifice, that love meant giving everything you had. But now I saw the truth. To them, I was just a means to an end. I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the papers I collected over the years. Mortgage payments, bank statements, credit card bills, all the things I'd paid for, all the things I had sacrificed for them. My retirement savings, my wife Maria's life insurance money, and even the small nest egg I had hoped to leave for the future. All of it had disappeared into their life, their fantasy. I had worked hard my whole life to build something, only to watch it vanish in an instant. The numbers were staggering. I had been paying for their lifestyle for 5 years straight, month after month, with no appreciation, no acknowledgement. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. But I wasn't angry anymore. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had been a fool, but not anymore. I looked at the stack of papers in front of me, all the evidence of my generosity, my sacrifices. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about taking back control. It was about making sure they knew exactly what they had done. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their respect. I just needed to take back what was mine. I needed to make sure they understood that I wasn't going to be their fool any longer. I picked up the phone and made a call, but not to John or Emily. I wasn't going to waste my time with empty apologies or excuses. No, this time I was making my move. The number I dialed belonged to the bank, the place that had been more of a lifeline to them than it had ever been to me. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I assist you today?" The voice on the other end of the line sounded polite, but I could hear the automated script behind it. It was almost too easy. "I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I said calmly, as though this was the most ordinary request. "Certainly, sir. May I have your account details?" I rattled off the numbers without hesitation. The details of the transfer were fresh in my mind. I had done this for years. The monthly payments of their mortgage, the amounts they never seemed to appreciate. Today, I was taking it all back. I could hear her typing, the clicks echoing through the line. "I see the transfer you're referring to, Mr. Davis. $3,000 monthly to Wells Fargo, ending in, is there anything else I can assist you with today?" "Cancel it. Effective immediately," I said. The words felt like a weight lifted from my shoulders, but the hardest part was yet to come. "Understood, sir. The transfer has been canceled. Is there anything else?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "That's all." The line went silent, and I hung up. I sat there for a moment, the stillness of the house around me making the decision feel even more real. I had made my first move. There was no turning back now. The next step would take more effort, but it would be just as deliberate. Emily and John would have to understand that I was no longer going to be their safety net. They had to learn the hard way that their entitlement would cost them everything. But that wasn't enough. No, it wasn't just about stopping the flow of money. It was about exposing them for who they truly were. The ones who had used me, manipulated me, and never even looked back. The ones who thought I'd never stand up for myself. I walked over to the kitchen counter and pulled open the drawer where I kept the folder, the one I had been avoiding. Inside were years of financial statements, receipts, and a trail of evidence that no one would be able to deny. The mortgage payments, the renovations, the vacations. All of it was there, laid out in front of me. It was time to show them the truth. The days after I canceled the transfers passed slowly. There was no immediate reaction from John or Emily, but I could feel the tension building. They had to know something was off. I wasn't answering their calls, and the bank had stopped taking their money for the mortgage. It wasn't long before the phone started buzzing again. At first it was John, then Emily. They left messages, but I ignored every single one of them. I didn't need to hear their excuses. I knew what was coming. By the fourth day, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I was sitting in my kitchen, sipping a cup of coffee, when I heard a loud knock on the door. It wasn't a polite knock, but an urgent, aggressive one, the kind that said someone was angry. I set my cup down carefully, already knowing who it was. I walked to the door, and through the peephole, I saw John standing there, along with Emily and a man I didn't recognize. It was the kind of moment when you know everything has reached its breaking point. The moment when the facade finally cracks, and there's no going back. I opened the door, and John practically shoved his way inside, his face red with frustration. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, his voice tight. I didn't invite them in. I just stepped aside, allowing them into the entryway. "What's this about, John?" I asked quietly, my tone measured. I thought we already spoke. He glanced at Emily, who was standing just behind him, her arms crossed. She was still trying to play the role of the innocent one, but I saw through it. I always did. "We're in a bind, Dad," John said, his voice laced with desperation now. "The mortgage payments aren't going through. We can't pay the bills without your help. The bank's called and we're getting notices. If this keeps up, we're going to lose everything." I didn't flinch. "And what exactly do you expect me to do about it?" I asked, my voice calm, almost cold. Emily stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Dennis, please. We know things have been difficult, but we didn't want it to come to this. We just need your help one last time, and then we'll make it up to you. We swear." I looked at her, and I could feel the anger rising inside, but I kept my composure. "Emily, you don't get to make promises anymore. You used me for years, and now you want to bail you out again." I let the words hang in the air. "You've taken everything I've given, and what do I get in return? Your disrespect, your condescension." John's face softened, but the damage had been done. "I never meant for things to get like this, Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, okay? I was wrong. I should have stood up to Emily, to everyone. Too little, too late," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've already made your choice, John. I'm not going to keep bailing you out. Not anymore." John opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "I've made my decision. It's over." I stepped back and opened the door wider, signaling that it was time for them to leave. Emily opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't give her the chance. I just looked at her, and she fell silent. Slowly, she turned to leave, John following her. As they walked out the door, John looked back one last time, his eyes pleading. "Dad, please don't do this. We're family." But I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. "I'll always be your father, John. But that doesn't mean I'm going to keep letting you treat me like a fool." The door closed behind them, and for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The silence in the house felt different, cleaner, calmer. And now, the next part of my plan could begin. The silence after they left was deafening. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace that wasn't forced. No more calls. No more demands. No more pretending everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. But it wasn't over. Not yet. I knew what I had to do next. The evidence, the paper trail, the receipts, they were all right there in front of me. I spent the next few days organizing everything, putting together the full picture of what they had done, every payment I had made for their house, the renovations, the vacations, the endless requests for money. It was all documented. They wouldn't be able to deny it. I gathered everything carefully, sorting to the bank statements, the emails, the receipts of furniture, the remodeling bills, the full scope of my contributions to their so-called life together. It wasn't just the house. It was their entire lifestyle, funded by me, all hidden behind smiles and false gratitude. I wasn't going to let them get away with it anymore. I called the attorney. I wasn't sure if I'd need him yet, but it was better to be prepared. It was time to make sure they knew exactly how much they had taken, how much they had used me, and it was time for them to face the consequences. The following morning, I took everything I had gathered, all the documents, all the evidence, and went to their house. I wasn't going to wait for them to come to me, hoping I would cave in. No, this time I was going to take control. I wasn't going to beg for their respect or understanding anymore. When I arrived, John and Emily were both there, sitting at the kitchen table. I could see the tension in their faces before I even said a word. They knew I wasn't there for a chat. They knew what was coming. "Dennis," John started, trying to force a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We didn't expect you to show up again so soon. I wanted to apologize. Really, Emily and I have talked. We know we made mistakes." I didn't let him finish. I pulled out the stack of papers from my briefcase, placing them on the table between us. "Here's everything," I said quietly, my voice steady. "Every penny I've given you, every bill I paid, every favor I've done, all of it is here." I tapped the pile, watching as their faces shifted, as the reality of the situation settled in. I let the silence stretch on for a moment before I spoke again. "You used me, both of you. You took everything I gave and treated me like a second-class citizen in my own family. Well, now you're going to see just how much I've sacrificed for you, and just how much I'm done with it." John glanced at Emily, who was now looking at the papers with wide eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but I stopped her. "No," I said firmly. "This isn't discussion. You don't get to apologize anymore. You've had your chance. Now, you're going to deal with the consequences of what you've done." Emily's expression shifted from one of feigned innocence to one of panic. "Dennis, you don't understand. We didn't mean for things to go this far." "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "You've said it 1,000 times. You've used me for everything I'm worth, and now you're trying to spin this into something else. It's over." I stood up, walking toward the door. I didn't need to say more. The papers on the table spoke for themselves. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard John's voice behind me, small and desperate. "Dad, please, don't do this. You're our father. We need you." I didn't look back. "You had me when you needed me. Now you'll have to face the truth. I'm done." I left him there, standing in the kitchen, staring at the pile of evidence I'd laid out for them. The truth had been exposed. There was nothing left to hide behind. It didn't take long for the consequences of what I'd done to start showing. The silence after I left their house lingered in my mind, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt comforting. It was the kind that made you realize things were changing, that there was no going back. The first phone call came the next morning. It was from the bank. They confirmed that the payments I had been making for years, the ones I'd stopped, had been halted. John and Emily's mortgage was now in default. They would receive a notice soon, and if nothing changed, the bank would begin the foreclosure process. It wasn't my problem anymore, but I still couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. I had kept them afloat for so long, thinking I was helping, but the truth was I had been enabling their lifestyle, their irresponsibility, their arrogance, and now it was all coming to a head. That same afternoon, I received a call from John. His voice was shaky, panicked, as if he hadn't slept a wink. "Dad, please, you gotta help us. The bank's threatening foreclosure. We need you to step in and make the payment. Just this once, and we'll figure it out." I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence hang between us, listening to him try to explain himself, to make promises he knew he couldn't keep. But this time, I wasn't going to fall for it. "No, John," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I'm not helping you anymore. This is on you now. I've given you enough. I've spent years trying to support you, but you've made your choices. This is the price for them." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, trying to find the right words, but they didn't come. He couldn't say anything to change my mind, not after everything that had happened. "Dad," his voice cracked, but it didn't move me. "Not anymore." "Good luck, John," I said, before hanging up. I felt no satisfaction, no relief. It was just the final confirmation that I had done the right thing. I had set boundaries. I had stopped enabling their behavior. A few days later, I received a letter from John and Emily. It was a last-ditch effort to try to convince me to help. They apologized, of course, blaming their mistakes on everything but themselves. They asked if I would reconsider. They said they needed me. I tossed the letter aside. It didn't matter. They could apologize all they wanted, but the damage had already been done. There was no going back. As the weeks went on, I heard from friends and acquaintances that their situation had only gotten worse. They had to sell the house, and it sold for far less than what they owed. The lifestyle they had built on my money was crumbling, and they were left to pick up the pieces. I didn't feel sorry for them. They had made their bed. Now they had to lie in it. And as for me, I was finally free. Free from the guilt. Free from their manipulation. Free from the toxic relationship that had been poisoning me for years. But there was still something missing. Something that only I could provide. The final piece to my plan. A few weeks passed, and things only got worse for John and Emily. They were struggling to keep up with the bills. The foreclosure process was underway, and their attempt to sell the house fell flat. They were forced to sell it for much less than they owed. Their perfect life, built on my money and my sacrifices, was unraveling, and I didn't feel a single ounce of sympathy. I had cut them off, but they couldn't let go. The phone calls kept coming, as did the messages, apologizing, begging for help. But this time, I didn't even read them. I didn't need to. It was one evening, when I was sitting at the dining table, that the doorbell rang. I already knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. It was John and Emily, standing there looking defeated. The door opened, and they stepped in without asking. "We need to talk," John said, his voice quiet, like a man beaten. "You've had your chance, John," I said, looking them both in the eyes. "I've done enough for you. You've had everything I could give, and now it's over." Emily's face softened, and she stepped forward, but I stopped her. "Don't," I said firmly. "You've lied to me, used me, and now you expect me to fix everything again? No more. You're on your own." John tried to speak, but the words failed him. He looked lost, desperate. But it didn't matter anymore. The years of manipulation and lies had led us here, a place where there was no coming back. "I'm your father, John," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm not your fool anymore. If you want to rebuild your life, you'll have to do it without me." They stood there for a moment, silent, before turning to leave. Neither of them said another word. The door closed behind them, and I stood in the same spot for a while, letting the finality of it sink in. I'd done it. I'd taken control of my life again. Months passed after final confrontation, and I never heard from John or Emily again. The phone calls stopped, the messages ceased, and my life returned to something resembling peace. I thought I would feel something, guilt, regret, maybe even anger, but all I felt was relief. A weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted. I wasn't responsible for them anymore. They were on their own, and I could finally live my life without the constant burden of their needs. I kept busy. I traveled a little, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I spent more time with friends, people who actually cared about me. I reconnected with hobbies I had long abandoned. Fishing, reading, going on walks without the constant worry that I was doing something wrong or being judged for every little mistake. I kept the letter they sent me on the kitchen counter, though, the one where they apologized, where they begged for another chance. It wasn't that I didn't read it. I did, but it was just words. And words had lost their meaning a long time ago. One afternoon, I came across an old family photo album. There was a picture of John as a child, and there I was, holding him in my arms. I remembered those moments, the good ones, when it wasn't about money, when it wasn't about manipulation. The love I had for him was real, even if he didn't understand it. I put the album back on the shelf. I realized I hadn't thought about it in weeks, hadn't dwelled on it, and I knew that was a good thing. I had finally learned to let go. The anger, the hurt, the sense of betrayal, it all faded into the past. What mattered now was my future, the life I had left to live. It wasn't ego or revenge that made me do it. It was survival. I had chosen myself, for the first time in a long while, and that was the only choice that mattered. I survived, I whispered to myself, with a calm I hadn't known before. This wasn't selfishness. This was survival.